We were merely pals sleeping together on a highway journey until I sensed his hand where that moment shouldn't have been altered. I feel like everything is dragging me into a hurricane of bewilderment, longing, and a form of affection. I never anticipated what started as an unpleasant mishap that became a journey of introspection and profoundly surprising. Passion is curious about how we managed to make it work. Stay tuned. This tale may leave you out of breath. I was 23 in the summer of 2025. Traveling via car with my closest pal, Chris, is traveling from Chicago to New York via car. We traveled to Orleans for a music festival, dreamed of since we were in college, near since the first year at the bonding overtime at the University of Illinois study sessions at night, and our mutual affection. Halvin was 24, a graphic for jazz designer with a potentially lighthearted laugh up a room, and I was a barista, Mike. I was still trying to figure out where my life was. I've always been aware that I'm gay, but I hadn't told Chris because I didn't believe in him. But since I didn't understand how to express it, and I was scared of. On the third day of our friendship, we lost the journey to a remote area in Mississippi. After exiting the freeway, we made sure into an inexpensive motel of the type with neon lights that flicker and beds that creaked if you merely took a deep breath. One key was given to us by the clerk. Smirking, "Boys, I hope you have one more bed." I laughed it off, Sharon, so don't worry. I'm feeling queasy, but Chris simply. His dark eyes were heated, so he shrugged. Work, he replied nonchalantly, and I gave a nod. Attempting to disregard how my heart was, Chris was gorgeous, tall, and athletic when he raced, slim with dimples and curled black hair that was evident whenever he grinned. Yet I keep those ideas to ourselves, tossed our luggage into the air of the room. Rich in the aroma of worn carpet and inexpensive air freshener, and alternated after taking a shower, I put on a t-shirt and my nerves became knotted and climbed in shorts. The mattress dipped into bed as Chris, "This is cozy," he taunted, joining me. My face is heated from the forced laugh. Nerves, we silently laid there. The tiny something charged the space between us. Unsaid, the AC's hum filled the room as I attempted to doze off. Each I knew, deep down, how near he was. I was just beginning to nod off when I felt his hesitant, warm hand. Grazing my thigh, then gradually going higher somewhere is undoubtedly shouldn't have happened when my eyes opened. Breath trapped in my chest, heart thumping. "Chris," I spoke in a whisper. Shaking, he froze and withdrew his hand. His face flushed instantly in the darkness. Light. "Mike," I apologized for his stutter. His hands were running as he sat up fast. With his curls, I didn't mean to. His black eyes believed he stopped himself. Panicked, I sat up to my thoughts. My skin is still tingling where I'm spinning. "What were you doing?" He had touched me. "Pondering?" I asked, my voice hardly audible. He stared at my shaky hands as I whispered. His tight jaw prevented him from meeting my eyes. His expression returned to mine. Raw. "I wanted to tell you for a while." His voice was low as he added, "I believe I'm attracted to men, and I just looked, feeling things for you." My pulse was racing with a mixture of shock at him, and perhaps I had another desire. I had never given Chris that much thought. Not really, but now that he has the lingering confession between us, I was unable to ignore my body's reacted. As his words broke, I said, "I'm gay," with something open inside of me. Unfiltered, the words are leaking out, and to be honest, a tiny smile spread across his eyes. "I didn't know," he said, pulling at his lips, remarked in a quiet voice, and I tightened my throat. "I didn't. And up until today, we simply—" The air charged the room as they sat there. I could tell at that time that we were buzzing. This road journey had recently modified. I hardly slept at all that night. Chris's admission touched everything. played repeatedly in my head. The motel room seemed to get smaller with each hour after I came out as gay. He'd acknowledged that he felt the same way I did. Hadn't anticipated emotions. I wasn't certain how to deal with filtered morning light via the flimsy drapes, and I was a nerves raced through my body, and I looked at Chris as still sleeping with his curls next to me. His chest rose as they were tasseled. Descending in a steady, leisurely cadence, he seemed so serene that I experienced anything but. We quietly packed up the tension. Was thick and heavy between us. Everything was gone. "I'm sorry about last night," he said without saying. As we loaded the car, he finally said, his eyes were focused on the low voice. "Ground. I should not have spoken. Went too far." I shook my head. As I shut the trunk, my hands were shaking. I said, "It's okay," in a tone that was softer than I just wasn't what I meant to be, anticipating it, yet I'm not angry because he looked then gave me a serious, inquiring look. They give me a glimmer of optimism, and I experienced that spark once more. The identical one from the one I couldn't ignore last night. We hit the road. The highway extended far ahead of the Mississippi, a haze of green and brown that we spoke. But now it was different and cautious, as if neither of us dared to say I filled him in on my journey. How I discovered I was gay in high school, but had never responded to it in the way that I'd been afraid that if I ever came, I would lose him. He listened with his hands clasped tightly around steering wheel, after which he revealed his aside from how he had been doubting himself, how spending months with me affected him, acknowledged that he wasn't as straight as he had been, too scared to speak till last evening. "I didn't mean to make it weird," with a worried smile, he said in a hushed voice, his face flashing. "I just couldn't contain it no longer." I nodded, my pulse pounding at the time. I reached for his hand mindlessly, my fingers grazing the equipment. "I'm glad you told me," I said to my shift. He clasped my palm and his voice became more steady. We drove in like manner for a while. Hand in hand, the strain gradually. Something fresh has replaced the melted something hazy at first. But by the time when we arrived in New Orleans, the city was alive. Heat and music made me feel closer to him, greater than ever, but also more perplexed as to what were we buddies now, or something more. Didn't know the answers, but I was certain that, in an attempt to locate them, we looked into the streets of the French Quarter hostel bustling with people, dancing jazz and the scent of bananas in the air. This time worldwide, we had a shared, I was relieved to have a room with 2 beds. As well as a bit, sadly, "Let's go investigate Chris," stated that his dark smile had brightened. As my eyes met the light, I nodded enthusiastically, to divert attention, but as we stepped into the festival's commotion and hues, when my phone rang, it was a text message from your sister's father is in the hospital, therefore you must. When I got home, the music made my stomach plummet, disappeared, and when I turned, the street appeared to tilt. Chris's face was immediately filled with worry that something had occurred, and I wasn't sure how I would tell him. Suddenly, everything had suddenly altered once more. My hands were shaking as I gave him my phone. The boom of the event faded into the distance. The globe continued to rotate for humans. "My dad," I said in a voice. "He's in the hospital." Causing my thoughts to race with thousands of Chris's face softened as he expressed fear. "Put a firm hand on my shoulder," he stated firmly. "We'll go back." And I nodded. I'm glad he was able to take charge. We fled when I was unable to think clearly. The music fades behind the festival. Farther away and rushed back to. We silently packed our bags at the hostel. The journey back was concentrated despite the strained vibe. The roadway to Chicago seemed to go on forever, continued without any end in sight. The engine's hum was the sole sound, with sporadic messages from my sister's father was stable after suffering a small heart attack. awake, pleading with me for forgiveness and comfort. Torn inside, I gazed out the field-watching window that flashes by my thoughts. A tempest of Chris reached over and grabbed my thoughts. His fingers moved through my hand, and I kept the warmth of his touch close at hand. He said, "Grounded me, he'll be fine." I nodded quietly, wanting to trust him. We had to stop in that evening because Memphis is too exhausted to continue driving. Discovered a budget motel with 2 rooms, but when we established a space between ourselves, I couldn't sleep because I felt too cold and broad. My mind was racing with ideas about Dad and us. I said to Chris in the shadows, just to ask, can I sleep with you? He turned to face me in the darkness as he slept. Light, his eyes appeared gentle and compassionate. I climbed, nodded, and raised the blanket. The mattress next to him dipped. His warmth enveloping me beneath us, I felt safe for the first time that day. We laid there with our backs to one another. The silence between us was mixed with breaths. Felt alive with an unsaid thing. My arm feels warm, but I'm not sure I want to ruin this. I shook my head, reaching for his hand, touching his you with my fingers. Did I not say that my voice was more steady now? His eyes broadened, and I believe I sense it too. A gentle grin emerged as he leaned in his lips softly and tentatively, brushing mine question, not a declaration. I gave him a kiss. I kissed him after my hand found his cheek. Thickened, sluggish, actual electric nerves sprang to life in my body. When we eventually taken a deep breath, I grinned broadly. Once the day's burden was removed, even if just briefly, but after that, my phone buzzed my sister's fresh message. "Your father is inquiring about you and Chris. I heard you two are together. Are you prepared?" When you arrived, my stomach fell. Cold fear took the place of the warmth. How was I? My parents didn't even know I was gay. Going to describe how we got to the following morning, Chicago felt quite different from the heat, gray and cold. Seeing the mayhem of New Orleans, Chris was by my side as I went to the hospital. Putting a hand on my back while we passed pristine hallways with an antiseptic odor, Dad was in a private room, and the air was filled. Despite his pallor and IV in his arm, he smiled when he spotted me, his blue, weary eyes brightened. "Mike," he whispered in a faint voice, and I hurried too. I was crying when he hugged him. "I'm here, Dad," I said in a whisper. He tightened his grip on my hand while trembling. Mom was standing close to her, which surprised me. Her face is inscribed with a mass of blonde hair. Concerned, my sister Ellie was standing in the corner, arms crossed, eyes flicking. "Who's this?" "Between Chris and me," Dad asked, his eyes settling on Chris. My heart thumped as I gulped hard. Chris is a friend of mine," I added softly. I nodded, Dad, but I could see the query in his eyes as though he had already was aware of Ellie's tightening lips. Verified that she had spoken to him about something. We briefly discussed his health. Regarding the doctor's remarks, but the unspoken tension pervaded the air. Returning at my folks' house that evening, when everything reached a breaking point, the mom was brewing tea in the living room when Ellie drew me away and spoke in a hushed voice. I heard you, and her brown eyes were keen. She said that Chris was more than just a friend. I froze my hands as her tone cut off. Crinkling, "Did you hear me ask my voice?" She crossed her arms and her face trembling. "A friend spotted you at the unreadable. Dad is unsure of the festival holding hands. You should tell him that you're gay, Mike." My stomach fell, and I started to panic and claw, and I looked at Chris resting on my chest. His black eyes were loaded with worry before I could speak. A loud bang sounded at the door, followed by yelling, "Open up!" in rage. Mom froze her tea when someone yelled at her. Dad emerged, his face dripping and turning pallid. His face was stern, his robe was slack, and our neighbor was there when he opened the door. Mr. William, a 50-year-old man with grizzle, and behind him, red-faced, were a bunch of men. Your sons are noisy and obviously intoxicated. Mr. William, who is homosexual, yelled and pointed at me. My knees almost gave out as my blood ran cold. We don't want the males here to be like him. One of them, Jared, threw a beer can that Dad stepped and clattered on the porch. His voice rose as he spoke. Get off my property, he yelled, his hands shaking. However, he took a strong, protective position, and I saw a side of him that I had never seen before, expecting the police to be tough and uncompromising. Arrived shortly after the throng was dispersed. However, the harm was already done, so we sat in Dad. There was a profound hush in the living room. Turned toward me, his eyes and face both pallid. Locked on mine, asking, Is it true? I nodded softly, tears streaming down my cheeks. I'm gay, Dad, I remarked in a cheeky voice. The room is breaking, and I love Chris. The words were still hanging in the air. At first, Dad just stared without saying anything. Mom sat, clutching the arms of his chair, her hand lying softly next to his, and with a pallid face, Ellie stood close to him. Her expression crossed the doorarms. Chris reached over, unable to read, and took my fingers, entwining with his touch, helped me stay still. So I squeezed back, my heart thumping. I apologize for not telling, I muttered, you sooner. But this is who my father nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. He got up and made his way back to his room. Behind him, the door silently snapped shut. Mom drew me into her embrace. She shivered and muttered, I love you. However, I sensed her hesitancy. Over the next few days, the fear was expressed. Dad remained silent and rested like Mom tried to hold on to everything, the doctor remarked. Asking questions together in a gentle, cautious, Ellie's voice remained distant as she spoke. We're more incisive than normal. What if this gets worse? She inquired once. But I managed to catch her observing Chris and me while she believed I wasn't observing. And in those, her gaze softened for a second. But I wasn't searching. But Chris was my pillar of support. Presence to support both his and my hands. Reminder that I wasn't alone all the time. We would sit against the walls of my former bedroom, still covered in posters for bands, and discuss all of our worries and fears. Dreams about how this journey had transformed us. He said, I love you too, one evening. His dark voice was hardly more than a whisper. My eyes met his, and I gave him a kiss. My heart was full when the world vanished, yet the neighbor's danger remained present. We couldn't get rid of the darkness above us. Although William and his team never returned, the whispers followed their appearances when I heard the word and headed to the store. Hissing under his breath, strange, made me feel completely vulnerable. Yet Chris's hand in my thoughts gave me the bravery and silent power I didn't realize we had chosen to remain in Chicago temporarily to help Dad throughout his recuperation. And throughout that, I started coming out to more people at that time. Co-workers and colleagues, each disclosure felt a little less difficult with every rejection, less agonizing than the night Dad called. When I entered his room, his expression was solemn. Mike folded his hands in his lap. His voice sounded gruff. And I've been wondering, although I don't fully comprehend everything, I can see Chris's perception of you and your appearance if he brings you joy. That's what I nodded, tears blazing behind my eyes. I felt his arms as I gave him a hug, powerful, surrounding me. We're healing, repairing more robustly than previously. Yet as I left his room after receiving a text on my phone, you are not safe if you call from an unknown number. My blood ran cold from these hands. I showed Chris his face while trembling. Darkened, who sent that? And what did they wanted us to go directly to my parents? Their words became tense and their faces turned pale. It turns out that they phoned the cops once more. The number was associated with one of Mr. The Police issued a warning to William's friends. A restraining order was obtained as a warning. However, the terror persisted as a reminder of the expense of open-air living. In a location such as this, father became more aggressive in his defense. Mom stood by him, showing me how much she loved me, steadfast even while she struggled with her own uncertainties. And Ellie, too, changed her mind. One evening, her jagged edges became softer, put a hand around me and muttered, "Throughout it all, Mike, you have my admiration." Chris and I became much more in love, turned into a calm fire that was getting brighter. We would stroll the city with each obstacle, the sparkling lights of Chicago at night, those around us, and discuss the future. Relocating together, taking trips, and creating I desire a life in which we never had to hide. One evening, he mentioned this in a quiet voice. While we were standing by the lake, his hand in mine, we were still in the dark in the water. I nodded forever, and my heart was full. Kissed him, and the city briefly was ours. And now, a year later, we're living in a small apartment back in New Orleans' French Quarter apartment that the city's soundtrack hums in the backdrop. The jazz club where I work is one of our lives. Chris is designing the covers for albums, and we're leaving, our hands unapologetically clasped together. During that road trip, we strolled the streets. In the motel at that time, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever encountered. Yet it led me to myself through Chris. I discovered true love, and I discovered my bravery now as I see Chris chuckle from his deep dimples across the room. I know I'd see black eyes catching the light. What would you do if you had to do it all over again? If everything changed with a single touch, Chris and I were the subjects of this story. But it truly comes down to having the guts to love. Notwithstanding the world's pressures back, have you ever experienced an instance whereby redesigned your life? What is the one danger? You're prepared to share it for love. I would sincerely appreciate hearing in the comments, and click like if this story resonates with you. Click subscribe to activate alerts. More unfiltered, authentic stories are coming your way. Please don't overlook them. You for persevering through the end. If did this tale strike a chord with you? Don't forget to like and share the video. Someone who might subscribe and require it to learn more. Visit Anonymous Gay Tales. Sincere tales of your unwavering support means